Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRavelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Ravelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Ravelis. I am your host as usual. And yeah, obviously, I'm just going to tell you guys what happened because you guys already know what I talked about on the Instagram page. That, my workstation kind of started going a little bit buggers. It kind of, it didn't poop itself, but essentially it started having some heating issues. And so I had to take it in a micro center and they had to fix it. So we're without a workstation for a little days, but obviously, so that's not that much of an issue because I'm bringing the episode to you guys still today. So anyways, we're going to be talking about the whole Samsung depreciation thing because somebody had talked to me about this a while back and they wanted me to talk about it because it is a little bit jaw-dropping, especially what's happening recently with the S10. Obviously, as many people probably know, the S10 is a very popular phone right now, clearly, because not only is it the first phone that doesn't have a notch starting off the year, but at the same time, it introduced something new. Obviously, some people might say it looks ugly, it looks even worse, but everybody has their own preferences. But we're having a little bit of an issue when it comes to depreciation, and this is kind of something that I'd say correlates with the whole idea of the smartphone market peaking and everything. And in my opinion, I find it quite interesting, especially because if anybody that knows, if you've ever used an Android phone, you obviously know that every Android phone is going to depreciate in a different way, clearly. Like most of the time, based on an article posted by, let me pull them up to make sure I'm not misquoting them, an article posted by Tom's Guide, where they talked about that normally when it comes to a Samsung phone, they usually depreciate about 30 to 40% after 6 months, usually. And what happened recently with the S10 is the S10 has barely been out for less than 5 weeks, when this article was posted, it was about 2 weeks into it, or less than 2 weeks. And it mentions that you can already get the phone for more than $250 off in the European market. Obviously, this is very concerning to some people because they're like, okay, that's very quick. The phone hasn't been out for that much time, and it's already dropped more than a large amount, especially when we look into the article more. It starts talking about the history of the Samsung flagships and usually things, and it mentions things regarding, let me see if I can find it. So it talks about how in Amazon, the major retailers like Amazon Germany are showing significant discounts on the S10 with 120 gigabytes of storage, which you can get for as low as $896 US compared to the European list price of $1,025. Obviously, we have to convert them to euros, so it says that's $1,000 is usually 909 euros. And there's special discounts that make it even lower, as low as 23% discounts, which show the S10, the same phone, 120 gigabytes for $770 or 690 euros. And obviously, other retailers in Spain and other countries in the EU are doing the exact same thing. Obviously, it mentions that price drops happen with the SA and the S9 too, both in the European market and the United States, but only a few months after the introduction. And it goes into the whole thing with the S8. Obviously, a lot of people remember how the S8 turned out due to the fact that the S8, when it came to design, it kind of shaped everybody's mindset, how to look at a phone, essentially. That we were going to go in a direction with more going away from bezels, from these huge bezels that like the iPhones presented, compared to a more smaller bezel design and a bigger display. And this kind of gave Samsung the reputation for having some of the best displays on the market. Obviously, but that doesn't mean it didn't go without depreciation, because like I said, every Android phone, no matter what, is going to depreciate. Obviously, Samsung phones don't really depreciate as much in comparison to many of the Android manufacturers. As stated, it talks about how In just 3 months after the launch, the S8 had dropped 25.8%. But the fact that now the S10 already dropped $225 just 5 weeks after its launch. Obviously, this article was written May 27th, so it probably dropped even more now, and barely 2 weeks after it became available. And they kind of bring up the points like that it makes you wonder about how fast these units are selling. And usually some people are also saying that this is very abnormal. This is happening in the European market, especially that Samsung's strongest market tends to be Europe more than the United States most of the time. And obviously Apple did a very similar thing when it came to the iPhones, obviously, but Apple kind of already caught wind of how to deal with this due to the whole services thing. And, we've already had the conferences starting pretty much this entire year just showing off software. We really haven't had that much hardware until Dub, which was like a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago. But we haven't had the same thing, essentially. And I think when it comes to Samsung, this is kind of concerning a little bit due to the fact that Samsung doesn't really have that much services besides Samsung Pay, and obviously the watches are still doing good. Like, they're still making money off the watches. The watches are very popular, especially because, the operating system that runs on those watches run better than Wear OS on normal Google watches. So, obviously, the watches are a good thing. Samsung Pay is very popular as well. Obviously, Samsung TVs are making a lot of money. Samsung also makes refrigerators and things like that. They still have a lot of things going for them. Obviously, their TVs are still going to be very high-end, really high-end TVs. Everybody loves having Samsung TVs or Samsung monitors because they're really good monitors. We're not going to lie. And also, the SSD market's really good for Samsung as well. Their T5s are very popular for many professionals that like using them. Obviously, I went with the SanDisk, but don't at me. But I think it is concerning, especially because Samsung, I think in terms of software, doesn't really have much to compensate for this whole loss. And I think that's a little bit concerning, especially because Samsung seems like now it's falling in line with the other Android phones with hard depreciation. Like LG, we're going to pick on LG a little bit. LG phones tend to depreciate very quickly after a few, I wouldn't even say a few months into sale. Like, they probably drop like more than 50+%. And it's kind of crazy, and that's kind of sad because usually LG phones are really good. Obviously, things that hinder them are obviously the brand recognition, advertising, and also the software is just not as good. I remember my time using a G6. I really liked the G6, a very great phone I had, but obviously due to the lack of accessories, the software wasn't as good. The software updates aren't quick on there. I think it just kind of hinders it, and obviously in the hands of professionals, yeah, they love those phones, clearly. Like, for a videographer, those are going to be your best friends, especially because the amount of, I'd say, detail that's LG puts inside of their camera software when it comes to the manual modes and everything, that it has one of the most robust pro settings on any smartphone. And that's why most people that still buy them are usually videographers or people working on mobile photography, usually. Obviously, Samsung has always been the one that doesn't depreciate as much. Obviously, Apple seems to always be the king when it comes to depreciation because their products don't depreciate due to the fact that, everything really gets software updates for 5 years now, pretty much. So nothing's really depreciating as quickly. Like, you can still, for example, I could still sell my iPad Pro, my late 2017 model, and still get like $500 to $600 easily off it because it's still more than a few years into the cycle. So you don't have to worry that much about it. But I think that's something we have to keep in mind, that not many manufacturers kind of have that privilege. And I think that's something that Samsung always is good at due to the fact that Samsung, in terms of Android, has always been considered Apple's main competitor in the space. Obviously, if you look on a global scale, Samsung is much bigger market share than Apple. Samsung is still number one, and then Huawei was number two. They beat out Apple, but due to the whole Huawei-China trade thing going on right now with the US and China, that's going to end up changing. And obviously Google and then, OnePlus and all these other companies are very popular in foreign markets. And obviously, as we all know, OnePlus is trying to make a splash in the US market, which they're already doing pretty good at it. They're number 5 in the US right now. So they're doing pretty good. But you get my point. Samsung normally doesn't end up dealing with these kind of issues due to the fact that their phones are very well built, which is kind of sad and also interesting too, that we've seen details and articles written about, oh, the S10 is selling phenomenally. People are buying these off the shelves. Like the S10e was a great addition to the lineup because it introduced a good lower priced option for people that didn't want all the bells and whistles, because that's just how some people are. It's the same thing. It's the reason why a lot of people said that the iPhone XR was going to be the best selling iPhone, and it was, because in comparison to everything else, it was just a better option. Like, yeah, it had the same camera, had the same specs inside. It had a longer battery due to the lower display, but like I said, is you can't really tell the difference on those iPhone displays as much, especially due to the fact that they're still all capped at 1080p, which is kind of funny, but still, you get the point that they're capped. And I think that's why the XR sold incredibly well. And I wouldn't be surprised if when they make another one, like if they call it an 11R or whatever they decide to call the new iPhones this year, that it ends up selling really well as well. So I wouldn't be surprised. But it is worrying that the Samsung lineup, might not be selling as well, even though we've heard a lot of rumors and we've seen articles written that it's selling incredibly well. Samsung gained a lot of market share because of them. And I think it's kind of concerning that it might not be doing as well as we thought, or because usually when a company sells phones at a discounted price, that usually means, hey, we're not selling as much as expected. And depending on how you look at that, some people might say, oh, that's kind of a bad thing. Some people might say it's a good thing, but it really just comes down to how you view those things. But I think in terms of correlation with the whole decline of the smartphone market, I think, yeah, this is like it kind of just keeps reinforcing this whole idea that the smartphone market is pretty much capped at this point. We've already peaked. And whether some people want to keep arguing that it has or hasn't, like, let's be honest, it kind of has. Like we've already seen this from last year when the new iPhones came out and the XS and the XS Max came out, and then when the Note 9 came out. We saw this already. Like, Samsung lost over, if I was correct, it was over 20% in the fourth quarter of the year in terms of sales. Apple lost a good quarter as well. They lost, like, if I was correct, it was like close to 20-ish% because they lost a good amount. Because people just aren't buying iPhones, especially when people are trying to compare the iPhone 10 to the 10s. It looks the exact same way. Like the normal, that's the reason why they stopped selling the 10, essentially. And then they had to bring it back because people are like, crap, we kind of don't want to pay for this because there's no point. And that's essentially what happened. And that's why, because if the smartphone market wasn't peaking, then why is Apple, out of all of the companies, especially Apple, why are they starting to make a transition hard into services more? Like, it does. You get what I'm saying? It's like, if the market wasn't capping, then why would people want to put a lot of emphasis into services? Yeah, like Apple normally launches or does something new with a service, like at least 1 or 2 services a year, but you're not going to drop like more than 5 new services in less than a few months. Like, think about it. We have Apple News Plus coming out, then we have obviously the watchOS update, then we have iPadOS coming out, iOS 13 coming out, and then you have the Apple Card, and then you have Apple TV Plus, the updates to Apple TV. Like, you have all these things lined up, and obviously, yeah, there's not that much emphasis on new hardware, except obviously the new Mac Pro, obviously. And we already know how people feel about that thing, so we've already talked about that. But obviously, we're going to see what happens, because obviously, yeah, the later half of the year is when we start getting the big heavy hitters in terms of smartphones. That's when we get the new iPhones, that's when we get the Note series from Samsung, and that's when we usually get the new Pixels. Obviously, the new Pixels has everybody's eyes right now, especially given that what Google's doing with their marketing strategy. And then obviously the new iPhones, we're probably stuck with a similar design as they were from last year. The only difference is the camera bump that we've already talked about looks ugly. And maybe new MacBook Pros, maybe? Like, probably? Like, given the rate that the MacBook Pros are right now, they're not selling so hot, and most creators are pretty much leaving them because of big major flaws that Apple still hasn't been able to fix, even though it's a pretty straightforward fix. It's just make the damn things thicker. Like, I think that's pretty straightforward. Like, the easiest way to fix the MacBook Pro issue is just make them thicker. If Apple does that and gives everybody the professional ports back, yay, everybody will be happy, and then everybody goes back to their MacBooks. Like, that's kind of the main reason nobody really recommends buying MacBooks right now. I'd always recommend buying an iMac Pro if you're into that stuff. But yeah, But the Mac Pro, definitely not the base model if I were you. But you get the point. Is the whole thing with depreciation, I'd say, is very linked to the whole decline in the smartphone market, because now Samsung's feeling the effects of depreciation. Obviously, yes, phones like Google, Google's phones tend to depreciate pretty hard. Maybe, actually, depending, those don't depreciate as hard. LG definitely depreciates hard. Phones that come from the Asian market tend to depreciate pretty hard in the States because people are not that familiar with them, and they're like, what is this? Like, they're not so confident in it. Obviously, HTC, clearly, sorry. I liked having my HTC U11 when I had it, but they depreciate incredibly hard now because nobody even remembers them. So, really, Samsung was pretty much the only one that didn't depreciate hard. They still depreciated pretty hard, but not as hard as in comparison to everybody else. Like 30 to 40% after 6 months. Okay, that's not that bad, but it's not like more than 50+% in less than like a few weeks. Obviously, this is concerning though, that the phone already dropped more than $200+ in the first 2 weeks of it coming out. Obviously, we don't know what it is at right now because nobody has really posted anything about it. All I've seen is that there's a lot of people selling the phones for incredibly cheap nowadays, which is kind of concerning. So I don't really know what's going on. I don't know if I haven't heard anything that may be wrong with the phone. Nobody's really posted anything. It's mostly just been, the only thing people could probably have with it is probably the fingerprint scanner. They're just not willing to work with the in-display fingerprint scanner, but there hasn't been any flaws with the hardware at all. It's been very fluid. It's been very reliable hardware inside the phones. So I don't really know. Maybe it's just people, I'd say people are just usually in the market just to buy a phone and then sell it real quick. They just use it, buy it, sell it. And they're starting to realize that we can't really do that much anymore with these phones because people aren't willing to pay for them. So that could be, but I'd say the best bet that we pretty much have is that it's in correlation with the whole smartphone market peaking, because people just don't want to keep buying phones. We've gotten to the point that our phones have gotten so good, especially if you bought a phone from last year. Your phone from last year is pretty much going to keep kicking for like another 2 to 3 years easy. Like, people are starting to realize that they don't need to switch phones every single year. And I think that's kind of the reality of it, is Apple's not really innovating that much with the iPhones anymore because they realize they don't need to. They can just pump all the money into services. And Samsung, they just keep innovating, and we just have to see what they end up doing with the Note 10, because as much as I love the S10 line, personally, I plan on buying one. But I think, I think the fact that the phones have gotten so good to the point that people just don't want to upgrade every year anymore. And I think that's what's hurting the bottom line of Samsung. Obviously, am I going to say Samsung's going out of business? No, let's be honest, they're definitely not. If I'm being real with y'all, they have a very low chance of going out of business because of this. They still make money off their TVs, monitors, SSD. They still have a large sum of revenue, and they're still they're a very profitable company. Being honest, if they make $100+ billion a year and they lose 10%, okay, they still make $90 billion. That's still a lot of money, but obviously that's a huge lowball. So, but you get my point. Is I don't think this is going to hurt Samsung's bottom line. I just think they have to figure out what they're going to do to combat this, because obviously this is kind of concerning. Clearly, it's a very good phone, very popular. Its sales are very positive, but the fact that it's dropping very quickly is concerning. And I think that's what Samsung needs to take into account and see what their game plan is. Because, like I said, I always tell people, there's no benefit in buying a new phone every year. Realistically, you shouldn't, because we just gotten to the point that they're so good now. And that's pretty much all I got on that. I think realistically, for anybody that's interested in buying a phone, usually people wait near the end of the year because that's when all the big heavy hitters are out, and then people usually make their decisions. If you're a person that likes buying your iPhones, then you always wait till the end of the year anyway, so it doesn't matter what I tell you. And if you're an Android lover, personally, I would probably wait till, I'd say November at least. I think that's a fair wait off, because by then, that's when the new Note 9, the Note 10 will come out, and we'll already have the new Pixels, and, we'll see how that plays out. But that's pretty much all I got for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I know it's obviously a little bit more wonky because I wasn't expecting all this to happen with the laptop and things like that. I wasn't expecting it. I thought they would just check it real quick right in front of me and then I'd be on my way in an hour, but they told me because of backed up orders and things like that, I had to wait 2 to 3 days. So I said, that's fine. So I think that's pretty much great. I just, obviously, you guys might as well thank my friend Edgar for helping me out and letting me use the studio. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Thank you guys for coming back and listening. I know this is already episode 32, and we've already mentioned before, we are already closing in on episode 50 soon. So we're going to do a little poll, see what we're going to do for that episode. Either we remake the intro or we're going to make new artwork for the show. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy. Thank you guys for your time. I'm going to post a poll later today. Obviously this episode goes live on Friday. So there'll be a poll going live on Friday going over the topics for next week. But thank you guys so much. I love you guys to death. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend. Don't do anything dumb. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye, guys.